Last time we looked at the definition of a field, and we said a field, you can just think of scalars, which you can add, subtract, or divide. We move on to look at the notion of a vector space over a field. As usual, we are going to start by looking at the motivation for learning about vector spaces. So let's start with the motivation. So I teach, and I walk into a class and I have Ama, Kofi, and Kweku in my class. And when I walked into class this morning, I said I wanted to take some data from them. And that data, I wanted to collect their age, their height, and also because they are students, they get some allowances or some stipends that supports their stay in school. So I'll collect some data about their stipend or their allowance that they receive. So concerning their age, I asked Amma, because they are at the university, Amma is 22 years, so quite young. Kofi is 21 years, and Kwekwe is 24 years. So their age, this is in years. But I also asked about their heights, and I want to see in terms of whether they are the same height or whether one is short, tall. So I checked with Amma, and Amma was 1.7 in meters, and Kofi was 1.6, and Kweku was 1.8 meters tall. So I collected this data, but as I mentioned, I want to see how well they are taking care of themselves in terms of their allowances or stipends they live on. So I checked with Amma, and because we are in Ghana, we earn in cedis. So Amma says she earns 1,500 cedis per month, Kofi 2,000 cedis, and Kweku 1,200 cedis. So I collected this data. What do I do with this data? So we can have one container storing data about the age, and another container storing data about the height, and another container storing data about the allowance. So I'll call this container age, which here I have 22, 21, 24. The other container height, which we have 1.7, 1.6, 1.8, and the other container stipend, which we have 1,500, 2,000, and 1,200. Now with this container, I know that all entries on the first row consist of attributes of what? Amma. And attributes on the second row consist of attributes of Kofi, 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 and finally, attributes on the last row consist of attributes of what? Kofi. So you can think of vectors as containers that we store data or information. So you can think of what? Vectors as containers for storing data. So that if you're a physicist or you work in geometry, right? You work with arrows. There are some arrows in space. So you can think of vectors as arrows in space. Now, these arrows in space, they can change directions, right? So when you have an arrow in one direction, this would be another arrow in a different direction. So this is reverse direction. And we say that we give positive for the original and a negative for the negative direction. So you can think of vectors as arrows in space, but not just arrows, right? Arrows that you can put, that can be added. that can be added or scaled. How? Right. If you want to add two arrows, like we saw in our previous motivation, if you want to add this arrow to that arrow, so if we call this arrow A, this arrow B, you want to find A plus B, you start with your original arrow and you want to add B to. So wherever A ends, that's where B starts. So you move this arrow parallel here. So this gets to B, and this starting from here to here just gives us the vector A plus B. And we said we can also work scale. So if you have your arrow A, then twice of it will just be equal to A. So a vector is just what an arrow in space that we can add or scale.